What's the most out-of-touch thing you heard from rich people? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. While working for a valet parking service in the Santa Barbara area years ago, a woman hired us for a jewelry showing she was having at her giant house in Montecito, and while we were waiting for guests to arrive, my boss informed me that when the guests get in their cars to leave, that I needed to be sure to close their car doors, or else they would just drive off with their doors open. As they're so used to people closing their car doors for them. Story 2. Everyone in my life who has told friends to just buy a house because paying rent is stupid when it could be a mortgage instead. I get their angle, but the people they'd say this to haven't been able to save up enough for a down payment, and exclaiming as such was met with something along the lines of, why not? Or confusion at the idea of having to save for something like that in the first place. Someone once asked me why I have a mortgage and didn't just pay cash outright instead, because mortgages have interest. So if you just pay with cash, you won't have any interest. So I said, our loan was $170K, but if we take the full 30 years to pay it off, we'll have paid nearly as much on it as our home is worth after interest. Would you be willing to pay off our loan so we can pay you instead of the bank? First he said no, followed by why. Not why followed by no. That says it all. Story 3. Worked at a warehouse picking job. They didn't like that we conversed with each other while we passed, and one owner had us gather and said we should be grateful we weren't working in the sewers somewhere, as if that was all we could aspire to do outside working there. Story 4. This is a low-level one compared to many in this thread. While in college, I worked at a Little Caesars Pizza. The owner had the county rights and owned 8 of these stores. He was paying minimum wage mostly, and lived with your parents' probably wages to even the store managers. Our manager told us how he had the bad taste at meetings to tell the managers he didn't know what to do with his money anymore. Story 5. I've had 2 rich friends, separate times, defend their Republican political candidates for wanting to get rid of Social Security. My accountant has been telling me for years to not count on Social Security being around in the future and to invest elsewhere to prepare for retirement. People just need to listen to their accountants and plan. When I explained that many Americans live paycheck to paycheck, they both sort of shrugged like it wasn't their concern. Story 6. Some jagoff in Congress, and this was before the pandemic, thought that our average salary was $100,000 per year. Story 7. Buddy of mine has a nephew who is a 20-year-old trust funder who is set up well. Nothing against that. I would have loved it and enjoyed it. But we're talking about housing in the D.C. area. I'm a 25-year vet, if real estate, so WTF do I know? But this kid who hasn't spent a dime of his own money ever says, housing in the D.C. area isn't that expensive. There's cheap stuff everywhere, and I've never sweated over rent. He's never paid his own rent, ever. Story 8. Last year at an elite university, by now I had already gotten used to outlandish things, studying with the children of royalty, politicians, CEOs of household brands. It's really an entirely different track they're on compared to the rest of us. Me, on the other hand, my dad is a dosser, and I went through uni with what can only be described as poverty. One day, studying in the library with the kid of wealthy license owners, she makes the casual claim of how proud she is of us by funding ourselves through uni. A little confused by this, I asked, what does she mean as I work full-time and she lives off her trust fund? She clarified she made such a claim because she was choosing to spend her trust fund on her law degree, which is the same as me choosing to work full-time to pay for my law degree, whereas everyone else was being made to go by their parents. Story 9. Nothing like what other people have mentioned here, but I was a cable guy when HDMI was just around the corner. So cable boxes and VCRs and similar playback devices had the yellow video cord and the red and white audio cord. I can't tell you how many people in the rich neighborhoods forced me to hook up extra stuff like that because they simply had no clue. I mean, it's yellow to yellow. How does one fudge that up? X200B. That said, I've had service calls with a USB cable plugged into a Cat 56 port so many times I lost count. Story 10. When rich people say using EBT is stealing from the government, sorry, I want to eat tonight under a roof and don't get paid enough to do so. Story 11. Just book the trip. I was talking to my boss's wife about wanting to visit Switzerland. Yeah, I don't have it like that. She has Susan from Seinfeld money. She assumes everyone else must. Story 12. My coworker argued with me when I told him $20,000 would be life-changing for me and my family because it wouldn't be life-changing for his. I think he thinks everybody has a rich dad that gives them money. I work at this job literally to survive, and he works there because his dad told him he needed to get a job to keep getting his allowance. Story 13. This from the UK's current PM, so we'd realize that, as someone worth more than our king, he can resonate with those he represents struggling in poverty. He was asked if he had ever gone without something by an interviewer. All sorts of things, like lots of people. There'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have. Famously, Sky TV, so that was something that we never had growing up, actually. Story 14. My family only has a small yacht. As the follow-up to I'm only sexist because I'm poor. Honorable mentions. I should know which years Indiana Jones came out because my dad produced them. My dad bought me an apartment in one of most expensive cities in the world that sits empty, so I have a place to stay when I visit. I'm choosing which uni to go to based on which has the nicest piano for me to play. What did I do over break? I stayed in a villa on the French Riviera for 2 months. My millionaire boyfriend is paying my tuition. Story 15. I once heard someone complain to my dad what selling $20 million worth of real estate was going to do their taxes. She's a hoot, though. Story 16. There was a guy who recently gave all his money away and lived on the streets to prove that anyone could earn millions. Then his father died and left him millions. He then stopped living on the streets and claimed to have proved his point. Edit. Spelling. Story 17. The I want to say 12 or 13-year-old son of one of my clients literally expressed confusion to me when I asked them where I could get more paper towels from when they ran out in the washroom of his parents' however many million-dollar yacht. He said something like, "It's always there, what do you mean?" He was so disconnected from the process of, I guess, cleaning and restocking that he just thought that stuff would always be there and never run out, lol. The look of genuine confusion on his face was just something else. That's not the first time I experienced that either. Talking to the kids of extremely wealthy people is always a trip. Story 18. I had a classmate whose parents never taught her to do laundry, nor did they pay for dry cleaning. They just bought new clothes for the whole house whenever they needed more. This was during home economics class when we discussed how to do laundry. She was unaware that washing clothes was a thing and admitted to me that she was re-wearing a pair of black leggings and asked if I noticed she had worn these last week. Like sweetness, I would have never guessed that's how you live. But if you're looking to thin your closet, I've been wearing my cousin's hand-me-downs dang near my whole life, and we are the same size. She told me they throw the clothes out when they're done being worn. I was stunned silent the rest of class. Edit a word. Story 19. Fudge celebrities singing Imagine from their multi-million-dollar homes while people are struggling to afford food because they couldn't work during the lockdowns. Story 20. Self-made man who inherited his father's successful business. The government shouldn't be funding social services. Taxes should be lowered, and then people will have the money to donate to support them. Story 21. Being told by a guy who has not worked a day in his life and living off of inherited money that poor people are poor because they don't invest their money right. Answer. I saw a brilliant reply to a tweet once that I've used every time this situation arises. Some girl tweeted about how much she saved by cutting out coffee, and this guy replied, "I've studied the habits of millionaires, and while cutting back on small expenses is a good start to building wealth, consider supplementing your income with massive financial fraud." Credit to the author, Roy Scott. You deserve to go viral. Story 22. A really rich kid I worked with, well, he was like maybe 25 or 26, was out to dinner with us on a work event. He ordered a bottle of wine from the sommelier, and the sommelier indicated he no longer had that vintage, but he had a similar vintage. He also explained politely the cost delta. The first bottle was going to be $7.50, and the new bottle would be $8.25. Rich kid looks around the table and asks, "Is that a lot?" Our boss just said, "Not if you're buying. But if I'm buying, you better pick something else." I've told this story before on Reddit, but it's still one of my favorite examples. Story 23. Oh, your truck is having engine problems. Why don't you just buy a new one? Context, someone who is a genuinely nice human being, but whose net worth exceeds $500 million to a contractor who was doing work on their place. This contractor does a lot of work for these people. Contractor laughed it off, but said, "If it dies, I won't be here next week to finish." "Oh, do you want one? Let's go down to the dealership. I'll buy it for you, and you can pay me back over the next couple of years. You need a truck to do your work." Like I said, genuinely nice human being, completely out of touch with everyday people, money issues. Their kids, completely decent humans, but the parents kept them in public school where I met them. I had no idea how rich they were when I met them. Story 24. A rich person once said to me, "Why don't you just buy a second house for your vacation getaways?" As if owning one house wasn't already a huge financial stretch. Story 25. Young people don't actually want to own houses. I don't remember who said it, but it was in an interview with a property investor discussing the housing shortage. Either he was oblivious or he was lying out his jerk. Story 26. I am a frugal person with a salary. It's quite small, and I live in an apartment that is a hit pricey, but it's a safe and desirable area, and I drive a used car that is almost paid off. I rarely eat out. I make my own pizza instead of ordering takeout. I can barely break even. I have about $10 after bills, rent, groceries. I use coupons. I try to go out to events that are free or on free days at the museums. I have a second job that I work on weekends to help cover some expenses. I shared this with a rich ex of mine who told me her lifestyle was very different following some family stuff. She said, I am so broke I can't travel anymore. And I said I relate, but told her ways to have fun for little or nothing. She was like, yeah, I mean, I can only go to London in a month. Isn't that wild? And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, I can't just travel. I just fly YY to London, BC. It's a networking opportunity. I didn't know you could do that. I usually just use Zoom. I haven't left the country in a year. And when I did, it was to go to Canada, which was paid for by someone else. Story 27. The sole owner of a company I worked for held the annual company meeting for the 40 employees, in which he said we wouldn't be getting raises because the financial goals weren't met. He proceeds to show exactly how far off we were. Our expenses were equal to the year before, but revenue had only grown a small amount, leaving the net company profit at a meager $10.6 million, his profits. Then he tells us how he understands that it is rough news and he's known what it's like to have financial struggle. I can remember when my parents would take us out to the summer house when I was about 13 or 14. There was a local kid I was friends with who lived near the estate, and I would go over to his house, and we had off-brand soda that wasn't even refrigerated. Times are tough, but we all get through. Meanwhile, I had a 6-pack of Doc Shasta sitting on my work desk. Every company meeting had a new story where he showed how much of an elitist he was. I used to have a list of his stories, but it's been a decade. A couple more I can recall. When iPads were out for a year, you see people spending the money on them, people who shouldn't have them. I'm talking to people who rided the bus to get to work each day. I knew the main financial targets were met, but not the stretch goals, so I was blowing off steam out at my ranch from Thanksgiving until New Year. I was out hunting or four-wheeling each day, and suddenly I had an inspiration. One more unrelated to wealth, just because I think it's a funny rant. The Roomba had huge success on its first version, then version 2 came out, and it had lost some of its initial appeal. The company took in all the info and created a product that can go up over rugs, can charge itself, and can do all the things that customers wanted. And with version 3, they came back strong. That's what our company is, kind of like Roomba. We had a rough year, but now we are on track to come back strong. Our company is like a robotic vacuum. It's soulless and sucks. Okay, story 28. I did some medical volunteer work in Haiti post-earthquake. Stayed on a Christian missionary compound because the clinic I worked at was supported by the mission. At dinner, I was talking about the bathroom at the clinic, basically an outhouse, and how instead of toilet paper, there was a bucket with torn-up book pages. The only reaction I got was a gasp, followed by, I cannot believe they treat books that way. I was speechless. Like, if that's what you took away from that, I cannot help you. Story 29. She's not as rich as others, but my old boss thought I could afford a house on $38K a year. This wasn't even 5 years ago. Story 30. My friend has a charity, and these wealthy folks took him out to dinner to talk about the work he does. When it came down to making a donation of any amount, they were hesitant on whether to give. The bill for dinner came to the table, and it was like $1,500, and they just dropped their Amex card like it was no big deal. Story 31. I work in the emergency room in an area with plenty of rich retirees. When you stitch someone up, you get to talking about life because it's often a lengthy procedure depending on the extent of the injury. I was putting this old geezer's hand meat back together, and he told me that there is a service he uses to automatically split his cash into separate accounts at $250K each, so that all of his money would always be FDIC insured. Whenever he gets another $250,000 deposited into his main account, it gets funneled into a new maxed out bank account. He recommended I use this service. I am in my 30s with student loans. Story 32. I shared an Uber with some college kids, and they were, rightfully and hilariously, giving their friend hell because he just learned that people clean their underwear and wear it more than once. All his life, he had just been wearing his underwear once, then throwing it away and buying more. Story 33. I had a friend in high school genuinely confused as to why I needed a new job after quitting my last one. He told me jobs in high school are just for fun because our parents pay for everything. I had to explain to him that my parents didn't pay for my car, insurance, gas, etc. Story 34. My ex didn't know you had to pay for power and was surprised when I told him if you don't pay your power bill, it gets shut off. He wasn't rich, but his parents had money and paid all of his bills. Story 35. When the pandemic started, my company mandated we still work from the office, but invested in plexiglass dividers and enhanced sanitation methods, i.e., they had someone walk around spray Lysol every few hours. Meanwhile, all the corporate assholes would do Zoom meetings with us while from their home, with their really nice houses and yards, and even pools on display for everyone to see in the background, while they talked about how the pandemic has affected us all and that we're all feeling the stress and frustration from it. Most recently at my current job, some higher-up I've never heard of sent a company-wide email to announce that, with bittersweet emotions, he was taking a career gap in order to focus on traveling and finding himself. He went on to word it as if it was a sad moment that someone in their mid-30s could afford to take time off work and travel the world with their whole family while staying financially secure. Story 36. Where is your beach house? I was at a cocktail party at a beachfront house on Isle of Palms, SC. Everyone was in private equity, Manhattan-based. Was chatting with someone and they asked me where my beachfront home was. I was a 25-year-old associate with 2 years of experience making about $75,000, but I was supposed to own a multi-million-dollar beachfront property. I guess they just assume property is so cheap in SC, everyone owns a beach house. Story 37. Used to travel for a glamping company, Glamour Camping, where we would set up huge canvas tents for fancy weddings and parties. We woke up real early one morning to a bunch of calls from some rich LA socialite about how the tents were wet, no other explanation. We rushed over and it turns out she had no idea what the concept of condensation in the morning was. I can't control nature, sorry, lady, you're not getting your deposit back. Story 38. What's the point of a mortgage? You'd be saving more paying it all at once. The uni I went to made these sort of conversations irregular. Story 39. Oh, I've got a good one for this. I was a banquet server at an art gallery a few years ago, standing outside holding a tray of wine when this lady's conversation hit my ears. It's so frustrating that these people want so much to watch my children. Them living in my house is more than enough payment, I'm certain. I'm actually thinking about finding someone from another country who I can just pay with a room in my home and have them also clean up after us. But then I'd have to deal with them not speaking English. Ugh, 5 other people nodding along in agreement, just some rich people casually expressing their desire for live-in slaves. Story 40. Back in 2006, I was working at a movie theater. Guy gets a large drink and popcorn, comes out to like $20. He exclaims how expensive that is, which is true, before declaring how glad he is to make 52-hour and handing me his card. I was 17 and making 6.25 at the time. Story 41. The owner of my company in Texas couldn't believe that everyone in our department had not been on an Alaskan vacation before. This same owner had me draw up floor plans for his new house, and it had an entire room dedicated to Christmas decorations that stayed up year-round because his wife liked Christmas so much. Said Christmas room also had a Christmas closet. Story 42. When we met in our friend group, the rich friend showed us his new expensive winter jacket for $500, and from time to time he goes on a shopping haul with his rich dad where he spends $2K. One time we confronted him about his bragging and asked him if he didn't think that his spending for clothes is quite a lot. His answer, well, I know some people who spend more, and I know some people who spend less. So I think I am average statistics 101. Answer, I'm kind of like that, but on the opposite side. I grew up in cabins and regularly hauled drinking water. Half the people I know live similarly. Half grew up middle class or above in suburbia. So I figured maybe half the people lived like I did. My boyfriend's like no babe. Most people have an actual room and shower in their house growing up. You were just poor and rural. Story 43. I have one that just happened. An old coworker posted about her umpteenth vacation so far this year and captioned it, pro tip, always buy the spa package. Story 44. I was talking with some coworkers, and one of them was in the process of buying a house. She was going from a small apartment to a 5-bed 4BA house and was seriously worried about the time and upkeep required for such a large house and was considering dropping out of the purchase and losing her earnest money. Other coworker goes, I don't know what you're worried about. Just have your maid clean the extra rooms. Why would that affect your time? Turns out the dude always grew up with housekeepers, has literally never lived somewhere where he had to clean and assumed everyone had a maid come and clean their house weekly. He was genuinely confused to find out most of us middle to lower class have to clean up after ourselves. It explained a lot about that coworker. Story 45. I once had someone who grew up in LA make fun of me for growing up in Indiana. She said something to the effect of, I could have never grown up in Indiana, but don't most children grow up wherever their parents live? Story 46. Look, if you're that stressed, you should just do what I've been doing recently. Every 2 months, I go on a Disney cruise. They're awesome. Sometimes I go even more. Story 47. My own dad when I was 16. Just go out and go door to door with your resume and pitch yourself. If you don't come home with a job after one day, you just aren't trying hard enough. Story 48. I work for a very famous musician. He went on a rant one time about how could people enjoy working in a yard? How could they enjoy mowing or weeding? What could it cost to hire a landscaper for that maintenance? 100? Yes, that much banana. For the record, he lived on a large manicured estate. Story 49. My friend, who grew up not having to worry about money, once said, "Oh, I don't really eat leftovers." I told him that was one of the most entitled things I ever heard. LOL, I wouldn't even say he's rich, but it's definitely a different world not having to consider money all the time. Story 50. In law school, we had obviously a class about constitutional law. One topic was voter registration and IDs, and how there were some racially motivated reasons for things like Jim Crow laws and so on. One of the cases discussed the use of family Bibles as a means of ID in situations where people didn't have a hospital-issued birth certificate. One girl made a point to raise her hand and say that was so stupid. Why wouldn't you get a birth certificate at the hospital? And when the teacher tried to explain that this also applied to destitute folks in BFE in the 50s, she just didn't get it. She also got real pissy over how theft of food for a starving family is still a crime and should still be punished. Oh, and she lost her ever-loving mind when a Jewish classmate referred to Ash Wednesday as having some schmutz on your forehead on her personal Facebook. Like she tried to get the girl kicked out of student government. I've never met someone so entitled, so out of touch, and yet so fudge enraged. It was weird. I don't miss law school even a little. Story 51. I needed a bicycle to get to a new job. Found someone online selling a really nice bike for cheap, so got in touch. Took 2 trains to their house to buy the bike, and when I got there, it was a mansion. The bike was in a garage full of supercars and classics. They asked me where my truck was to load the bike on. When I told them I was riding the bike home, they laughed, and before I knew it, everyone in the house had been called to the garage to hear how I was riding the bike 3 hours home in the dark. No one offered me a lift. They just acted blessed at how they didn't have to do such things. Answer. Feel this. Even from not as rich people, I have still been asked why I don't take the car instead of public transport when I buy used stuff. Or once when I picked up a lamp for free, the woman asked me why I didn't just buy it as it wasn't expensive. Like, what did she expect me to answer? Start sharing my whole story of how I just moved to a place on my own and don't have parents who can help buy stuff for me. If someone spends time on picking stuff up or buying used stuff without a car, it's probably not for fun. Story 52. I know actual rich people, not portrayed on TV rich, and most of them are pretty well-grounded everyday people. You wouldn't know they were rich by just hanging out with them. But every now and then they don't realize that a few $1,000s makes a big difference to us not as well off. Answer. Honestly, there's just as much of a gulf between middle class and poor sometimes. I don't know many rich folks, so the cluelessness I've gotten about things like not owning a car or needing to go to the grocery store every couple of days because my fridge didn't work right or not being able to buy some random electronic has all come from middle class folks. Story 53. Heard about this. A man was watching TV with his GF, a show about third world kids. They were refilling their water bottles from a rather nasty-looking river. This girl said, "Why do they do that instead of going home and filling with tap water?" Story 54. I had someone tell me once, I love Target clothes because they're like cute, but so cheap they're disposable, you know? Like disposable clothes. Meanwhile, I grew up where Target non-markdown prices were the highest tags I'd ever seen in person. And my highest quality clothes I'd ever owned and wore so proudly were their Basics line shirts. Thankfully, she was speaking to me as if that would be a relatable statement to me, lol. Otherwise, that would have felt like a hella degrading moment, as I was literally hunched over scrubbing her feet, giving her a pedicure at a high-end gym I worked for at the time. I laughed it off like, yes, girl. But I was like, darn, you don't even realize how different of worlds we live in, LMAO. Story 55. Guy I went to college with, he's actually a really good friend, but he has zero idea how the real world works. His bought him this decked-out 1,000 mansion of a house and sold it to him on a personal loan without interest for $300,000. I called him on that when he said his family wasn't really that rich. It was just good timing. I really do like the guy, honestly, but holy hell, I wanted to strangle him in that moment. Story 56. Not understanding why we didn't get more than one gift on our birthdays and Christmas. It was usually clothes. Answer: my mom never let us believe in Santa. She always said it was a game people play. Once when I was a little older, I asked why, and she said that before I was born, she taught kindergarten at a school with massive income inequality in Texas. Every single January, all the rich kids would come back from Christmas break bragging about all their presents, and all poor kids would come back crying because they couldn't figure out what they'd done that was horrible enough to put them on Santa's bad list, because he'd skipped their house again, just like he did every other year. That changed my entire perspective. Santa is supposed to give presents to good kids and skip bad kids' houses. But if you believe that, then by default, all rich kids are automatically good and all poor kids are automatically bad. Story 57. How do you only have one dishwasher? Imagine their shock when I told them the apartment that I had just moved out of, that I lived in for 14 years, didn't have one at all. Story 58. I don't understand how you can't afford a one-bedroom apartment. My ex to me. Said apartment was in Washington, D.C. I would have been paying for it myself. He didn't want to move in with me, while I would have been paying for college, full-time, and working evenings and weekends. Story 59. Well, if the jobs in your area pay shoot, there are none, just move. As if moving isn't prohibitively expensive for everyone making minimum wage or who are unemployed. Maybe not the most out of touch, but the frequency that people say it makes it worth including. Story 60. When I was in high school, I made some friends and started to hang with them. I told them I always wanted to ride a boat one day, and they said, let's go. So I went with them. Went to the docks, grabbed one, and went boating far into the water enough we don't see land. Chilled for a bit, went back, and as we were approaching land, we saw police lights flashing and waiting around the area we took the boat. My friend was like, crap, looks like someone ratted us out. I was confused. I asked what he meant by that, and he said, hey. Just people dislike when we borrow things sometimes. It took me a while to put together that these idiots straight up stole the boat to joyride. I was scared shitless, and I'm also a minority. I have never been in this area. We approached back with the cops waiting with the owner, and long story short, the owner wasn't pissed, just glad it wasn't someone else. And my friend's dad knew him, but still didn't know the boat owner. He seriously took a random boat to ride and just happened to somehow knew the owner. Not only were we not arrested, they just laughed it off and said to just go and ask again next time. They didn't even take out names. Story 61. My cousin married a rich guy when she was 21, and she also grew up pretty well off. I was 22 and just got married, and she asked us why we would rent a crappy apartment when a house is so much better. Had to explain that not everyone can afford a home in their early 20s, and especially not a $3 million home like her and her husband owned outright. Then she rolled her eyes and said, well, if you're both working, then you should be able to buy a home. We did end up buying a home the next year, but it was a small starter home that we bought for $150K. And then she said she didn't get why we didn't build a new home that wasn't used. Story 62. Is there a bathroom here for just customers and not employees? Old white woman who saw a young Hispanic employee leaving said bathroom. Oh, and we hadn't opened yet. Story 63. I taught high school math at a private school for wealthy kids. The lesson was about compound interest and how it's calculated. A student raised their hand and asked, why should we know this? Naive me answered that you need to know when you get a loan to buy a car or mortgage for a house. They looked baffled and asked me why I wouldn't pay for it in cash like the last Mercedes-Benz I bought. I couldn't reply after that. Story 64. My sister-in-law was dating a guy who grew up in India but was studying in the U.S. His dad was a top surgeon, and he grew up in a house where each family member had their own private apartments. We went away on vacation to the beach a few years ago and were cleaning up after my mother-in-law cooked dinner. I handed him the broom to sweep, and he proceeded to basically whack the floor with it. I asked him, is this the first time you've swept before? He smiled at me a bit sheepishly and said, yeah, but I saw the maids do it. It's like this, right? Later, we let him cut his birthday cake, and he just stared at it before admitting the staff would always do that part. He then butchered the cake. I'll also never get over the time he told me I needed to travel more, and I shouldn't let anything hold me back. I just stared at him before I asked how much he thought a special education teacher made. Unbelievable. Story 65. Anything out of Dave Ramsey's mouth. Just eat rice and beans and live in your car in a Walmart parking lot until you're rich. Story 66. I love the Dairy Girls, and I asked my husband to watch it with me again because I found it really funny. After watching the first episode with him, he said, it is funny, but I can't relate to their problems with money and food. Answer, oh man, that reminds me. I work for a pretty decently sized tech company that does the in-house catered lunch thing every day. They generally always have leftovers, especially after the pandemic, because it's always a hit or miss when people want to work in office versus remote. A lot of people generally swarm at the end to grab whatever's left to take home. And one of the engineers said something akin to, "I don't understand why people freak out about throwing this stuff away. It's just food." Story 67. How could your family accountant let that happen? When talking about how growing up, we couldn't pay the bills and had our water electricity shut off multiple times. Answer, mine is a story my dad likes to tell about the first parent meeting at my college orientation. The school spent 20 minutes talking about tuition payment plans. Then the mom of a kid I'd met earlier in the day raised her hand and asked, in genuine confusion, as if everyone else in the room was stupid, "Why would anyone bother with all that when you could just write one check for the entire year?" Story 68. I can't remember his actual words, and this idea came from lots of various rich people, that somehow the education level of the Midwest is just fundamentally different than that of the coasts. That Midwesterners are just a slow, backward people. Answer, way too many years ago to mention, but my college roommate from a suburb of Kansas City went to visit relatives on the East Coast. Friends of the relatives would ask her about what life was like. She would tell them asinine shoot, like only one man owned a TV, and they would all go to his place to watch it, and they went around barefoot all the time except in winter because you didn't want to wear out your shoes. They believed her. Story 69. Once had a college-age coworker explain to a bunch of us in EMS, try to explain that his family wasn't that rich because they only have a beach house, not a summer house, and then explain the difference between the two. Another coworker then went to pull up his apartment complex and pointed out the trailer park next door. Rich coworker then remarked that it must be nice to live next to a storage facility, referring to the trailer park. He didn't believe us when we explained that people lived in those trailers. He thought that was only something that happened on reality TV shows. We all hoped that inner city EMS would help bring him back down to earth, but it had no effect. Story 70. I had a rich customer text me at 2 a.m. that they couldn't pick up their purchase. No kidding, the store closes at 9. Story 71. Honestly, the most out-of-touch thing that rich people say are a result of not acknowledging that they are indeed rich. Too many people see themselves as the victim of those who are even richer. Story 72. At a high-end kids' clothing resale store called Once Upon a Child, the store only buys Nike, Adidas, or other well-known brand-name kids' clothes, and only kids' clothes. Everything must be new or barely worn or they won't buy it. Usually when you bring in a bunch of stuff for them to buy, they'll only buy 10 of what you bring in. I once saw them say no to a beautiful custom-made dress that an Indian couple had spent $300 on for their only child daughter. The reason was that it wasn't a brand name. So, at that store, some mom was selling a bunch of clothes and finding out what the store was taking and for how much. Her 8-year-old had wandered off into the store and came back with something she wanted to buy. Mom, no, sweetie, we don't shop here. We only come here so poor people have nice things to buy. Story 73. I heard one guy say that he was going to have to vacation in Hawaii instead of Europe due to a weak exchange rate for the dollar that year. Story 74. Owner of the company I used to work for was a car guy. His daily driver was a giant, fully kitted out Chevy Tahoe that he rarely drove more than just himself in. And he also owned a Ferrari, 1 or 2 Mercedes, and a Jaguar, I think. Specific models I don't know, I just know they were pricey. One day after I had worked there for a couple years, he came to our office in NorCal and tossed me the fob to his Tahoe and said, I need you to drive this down to Paso Robles, our office on the Central Coast, about a 5-hour drive where he is based out of. When I asked how I would get home, he said he would make sure I get taken care of. When I asked how he would get back home, he said, my Ferrari that I'm picking up from the shop. Later in the day, I asked him to show me where his windshield wiper controls were since rain was expected during my drive. He said it's all automatic. And when I asked how that works, he goes, how old is your car? Very nice guy that gave out generous bonuses every year, but he was pretty out of touch with us normies. Story 75. I wouldn't consider this out of touch, but I was definitely amazed. Several years ago, I worked at a retail store that sold a lot of different items. I was on the cashier one Friday afternoon when 3 young women, early 20s, walked in, decked out in luxury brands. They bought a suitcase and several other random items that totaled almost $400. Once I announced the total price, one of them pulled out 4 Benjamins like she was pulling out issues and handed them to me without looking. I asked if they were going on a trip. One of them answered, no, we got sick of carrying our stuff. I mean, I get tired carrying stuff too, but darn, to buy a whole suitcase and more just because they were tired was crazy to see. Story 76. My boss at the time made between 5 to 10x more than I did. We were talking about big purchases like a car or house, and he says something along the lines of, well, you'll get a great deal since you'd all-cash purchaser. I just kind of smile and nod, knowing that on my salary that he was aware of, I was not even an all-cash purchaser of groceries. Answer: I was talking about taxes and about rich people with my then boss. I said that six-figure incomes need not apply for tax credits. She's a dentist. I was an assistant. Her base salary was literally 5 times my salary. She was shocked that I thought she was rich. Did I mention her husband also made 6 figures? I had to slowly explain to her that she made my annual salary in just 3 months. It was quite the conversation, and we were state employees. She was nothing control of my pay. Story 77. When I nannied for a tech family, my boss was late on paying me and offered to pay me in Bitcoin instead. Like, if you think you're short on cash, what makes you think I want your fake internet dollars that cannot pay my rent? Story 78. Why did you take your car to get looked at? Just get a different one. I don't know why you waste your time with repairmen like that. Answer: I read a memoir a few years ago that I found incredibly frustrating because the author tried to paint herself as the child of some struggle. The story was framed as talking about the vehicles they owned, and one chapter opened up with her and her father in his new, to him, Porsche, going to buy her a Volvo because the vehicle she already owned needed a brake job. Story 79. My old boss was verbally criticizing her new son-in-law and said, he won't be any kind of decent husband. Hell, he only makes XX an hour at his lousy job. My boss clearly forgot that I was making less than that. Story 80. I thought the governmental advice in early 2020 for what you should do if someone in the household got sick with COVID was incredibly tone-deaf. I don't know if higher-level governmental appointees and functionaries are rich, but they're certainly comfortably well off. Advising that an ill household member should be put into their own bedroom with preferably their own bathroom was reasonable from the point of view of isolation, but made a mighty bold assumption that a lot of people had that kind of extra real estate. I mean, that excluded people living in a studio or 1BR apartment, people in apartments or houses with a bunch of roommates, or family households including parents and or kids that had moved in for any of a whole host of reasons. Once you've got folks hot bunking it on the couch, extra bedrooms and bathrooms ain't in it. Mind you, I am now retired but was a primary care doc in a rural town who avidly supported masking and vaccinations. It's just that advising this was so out of touch with the day-to-day lives of average Americans, it just blew my mind. Story 81. One I have from my husband today. He has lived in many places around the world. His dad works in hotels, so has been in Bora Bora, the Serengeti, Mauritius, and Tahiti. Today we went on a small boat trip with my family at our holiday spot on the UK coast. We saw dolphins. Super exciting and amazing, and he said, I don't know, after 5 minutes it was just really boring. I've seen so many dolphins. IDK, this question seemed to hit perfect right now. Story 82. It's just so easy to just drop a grand at Target, you know? My Starbucks coworker in Calabasas, Kardashian land, after he spent $983 on toys for his 4-year-old nephew's birthday. I don't know why he worked at Starbucks, except maybe his rich family finally forced him to get a job. Answer: I don't know why he worked at Starbucks, except maybe his rich family finally forced him to get a job. I worked with one of these guys once. He lived in a luxury apartment that his parents owned in the most expensive part of London, and they made him get a job to stay there. Not pay rent or anything. They also paid for anything he wanted. He just had to have a job. He was an absolute fudge twat. Story 83. Had a person in my office who we all joke about is like a distilled pure boomer. He got talking about Hurricane Katrina for some reason, talking about how stupid everyone was for not evacuating. I told him many of the people in NLA didn't have the means to get out even if they wanted to. He said, I know times get tough, but sometimes you just have to crack open that savings account. I was dumbfounded to be so out of touch that you think the people stuck down in the 9th Ward had a stash of money they were just sitting on. Story 84. Doctor told me to work with my personal trainer to figure out a routine that wouldn't make my chronic autoimmune disorder worse. I asked if he was going to cover the cost of a personal trainer out of his own pocket BC insurance. Sure as shoot won't cover it, and I've never been able to hold a job in my entire adult life because of said chronic autoimmune disorder. Dude was shocked poor people exist and one was in his office. Answer: I'm on Social Security due to chronic illness, ATM. Went to the orthopedist because of pain. It was winter. She said cycling would help my hip pain, and to just get an e-bike, they're fun to use. And so easy, I might even lose a few pounds. When I told her there is no way with my financial situation, she looked dejected for a few seconds before suggesting to wish for one for Christmas from my family. I still don't own an e-bike. Story 85. When you have a baby, you'll have a night nurse and day nanny. It's not that crazy. I'm not sure if she ever changed a diaper to this day. Story 86. Rishi Sunak, British Prime Minister for the moment, is stinking rich and grew up in a pretty affluent family. Mine went to a leading private school, Winchester, in Oxford. Doing the interview rounds in the current election campaign, he was pressed by an interviewer about whether his family had ever had to give anything up. After much umming and ahhing, the only thing he could come up with was Sky TV, a British satellite TV service. He was lampooned for days about that one. He really is a colossal twat. Story 87. 350,000 a year is not enough to live. This was my canker sore of an uncle-in-law 3 years ago complaining that if he's not making close to $1 million a year, he can't live as it won't cover the basics. He also lacked the self-awareness to realize he's the only person on his payroll making over 100,000 a year. If he can't make it on $350K a year, then what does he think his employees do? Story 88. I was a live-in super of a BLDG in Boston. The BLDG was 43 units, 40 were college kids. 1 year, a young girl moved in next to me. 3 months later, her electricity was shut off. She started pounding on my door, demanding that I turn her electricity back on. I checked her circuit breakers. They were fine. Went into her app, immediately noticed the pile of electric company mail on her table with big red letters, "Last warning. Me. You didn't tell the electric company that you were the new tenant. Tenant. What's the difference? Why do they need to know it's me? Me. They need to send you a bill for electricity usage. Tenant. Now I know you're messing with me. You don't pay for electricity." She moved out 2 days later of embarrassment, her parents having to pay for breaking the lease. She couldn't look at me for those 2 days. Story 89. Living outside Jackson Hole, this sister of a friend told me how hard it is to live there. You have to fly in your help, cleaning, yard work from Salt Lake. I had no words. Story 90. A coworker asked me what bank I used for my safe deposit box. I said I didn't have a safe deposit box. She said, "But where do you keep your jewels then?" Edit. I said I didn't have any jewels, and she just said, "Huh," and changed the subject. I actually get the sentiment. If I owned anything expensive, I would probably also have a safe place for it. But something about it made her sound like a Disney villain. Even though she was a very nice person, it's a very vivid random memory. Thanks, OP. Answer. I feel like can be an older generation thing, regardless of socioeconomic status. Many older women I know who are not wealthy or even financially secure have precious or expensive jewelry that was passed down to them and nowhere else to keep it where they feel it's truly safe. So why not the bank? They'll often keep certain very important papers in the safety deposit box as well. Story 91. Guy I worked with once literally couldn't comprehend the fact that I've never been on an airplane. It was like I told a normal person I've never been in a car before. Story 92. My sister's in-laws are very wealthy. They are very nice, though. Me and her went on a trip to Norway. We got tickets for dirt cheap, though, and had to take the 6 a.m. flight. And they called us on our last day there and said, "You look tired. Why are you taking such an early flight back?" We told them that is what we booked 4 months ago. And they said, "Oh, just call them and have them reschedule you for a later flight so you can sleep in a bit." We got the round-trip tickets for 419, and we had to switch planes in London and then New York to come back. It would have cost $1,100 to reschedule the flight one way, and I would have had to take an unpaid day off of work. No thanks, I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and save the $1,100. Story 93. I was telling a cute girl I met at a friend's birthday about a boom I was reading, The Zanzibar Chest. It was about a British journalist whose father was some minor colonial official. The journalist traveled extensively as part of his dad's work and his own. I mentioned wanting to travel to less popular destinations. Always wanted to go to Mongolia. My grandfather got lost in the desert there once, and it was a wild story. Her response was that I should just enjoy my life and go. I know lots of people who travel a lot, so the advice was not that outlandish that I mentioned. Family I was taking care of, things I needed to save for, and not having flexibility at work. It became a point of contention like, no, you just have to say fudge it and go. Your family will understand. My grandfather had late-stage Alzheimer's, and we were taking care of him at home. He didn't know my name, much less understand things. Story 94. Gwyneth Paltrow talking about how her lifestyle brand Goop caters to the common woman with items including the $5,900 hoodie, $6,250 cardigan, $7,200 V-neck top, and 66 egg-shaped female body part jade rock. Story 95. I once visited a VIP tent at the Oktoberfest in Munich. They were handing out umbrellas and then splashed 12-liter champagne bottles over the crowd, which protected themselves from the champagne with their umbrellas. Story 96. Rich kid, who is a super nice guy, wanted to go drinking with my buddy. My buddy said he didn't have any money. The rich kid said, no problem. We'll stop at a bank machine on the way there. The concept of having no money didn't even register. The rich kid thought that my buddy just didn't have any money in his wallet. Story 97. When McDonald's put out an employee budget, you know, the 100 for car insurance or the 20 in medical. Story 98. This girl got genuinely angry and offended when people suggested she could take public transportation to the airport instead of paying for a 50 Uber. She posted on social media about it. Did. The bus they suggested is very convenient and goes directly from our college to the airport. So it's not like she'd have to drag her luggage from bus line to bus line. Story 99. I was talking to a very rich lady we had just videotaped. She was a board of director at one of the largest oil companies on the planet. She told me she used to summer in Prague. I told her I used to summer in school. I thought that was a darn funny line, but it didn't even register to her. She was just confused on how that had anything to do with what she said. Story 100. I know a billionaire who lives a pretty coddled life with multiple assistants, flight attendants, and other personal staff to take care of every detail. He explained to me how he absolutely needed his director of continuity. Their job is to make sure that every one of his homes has all of the things he's used to all the time. The exact same cable streaming packages, same TV remotes, magazine subscriptions, food in the fridge, snacks in the pantry, season weather appropriate, clothes in the closet. He wants to be able to jump on his plane and go to Park City or Paris or Grand Cayman and have pretty much the same experience without worrying about the details. My own boss is worth about double this guy's net worth, and he drives a Chevy Tahoe, has no boats or planes or personal staff beyond his assistants at work, and maybe whoever his wife gets to clean their home. Story 101. I'm a type 1 diabetic and medical costs are insane without insurance. This happened in 2012 when the ACA bill was going through Congress. My boss was against it, and I told him how getting on insurance would help me. He grimaced and said, "That is your responsibility. You should get a job." I worked for him, and he made sure to not provide benefits for the employees. Answer. I hope his male body part rots off. Sorry. Every F-King Republican I know says stuff like this. The see you next Tuesday I grew up with as a best friend knew my parents died because they couldn't get health care. And she told me it was immoral our tax money go to help the poor. She's never had to work in her life, never will, and has had health and dental her whole life provided for her. Story 102. I was getting hired during COVID to work a job that paid $11 an hour, and the owner said to me, just talk to your accountant about it when I asked something related to my pay. Story 103. I do real estate photography for really high-end homes, and I was coordinating a sunrise shoot with the homeowner's property manager. This property is on a private island by itself and has over 1.5 miles of paved trails that twist through the property. The property manager told me that he has to arrive before sunrise every day and clear the trail of spiderwebs so the owner doesn't run into any, doing their morning jog on their private 1.5 mile long paved trail on their own private island. Story 104. My ex-boss was whining about having to buy new furniture from an upscale furniture place here because his sister was coming to visit. Poor guy. Story 105. When our multi-millionaire CEO made us say thank you for the napkins provided in our staff meeting, BC, someone else in the company bought us pizza and MGMT, was kind enough to furnish the napkins. Story 106. When they tell me I should just take off and go somewhere for a week, even if I made the money, I'd be eating the time itself from the no PTO I get. Answer, I've told this before, but my boss was trying to stop me from taking 1 or 2 days off at a time because their accountant was complaining about the extra work or whatever. I explained I was using the days to take a Saturday and Sunday off here and there to visit my family for birthdays or whatever. She responded, wouldn't you rather take a whole week off so you can fly somewhere warm? I just stared at her and said, I make minimum wage. How am I supposed to pay for that? She had no answer. Story 107. This girl in my high school casually said, just get some money from the bank. I know your parents don't have cash lying around, but they all have around $1 million in the bank. They are adults. Story 108. I've known quite a few people to not realize the benefit they received by just getting a house, car, and cost of a degree, sometimes including advance, from their parents. Much easier to budget when those items are removed from the equation. Even more so when you can get some income from the house. Answer this, I'm a fairly low-income single parent, but I help my daughter out with car insurance, etc., because she needs a car to work so that she can pay rent while she studies for her degree. She wouldn't be able to do what she needs to without a little help here and there. Different scale than buying new Car City apartments, business loans. The wealthy give their self-made kids, but works the same. Story 109. I work for a startup based out of San Francisco. I'm a remote employee halfway across the country and am therefore a sort of second-class citizen. My direct peers who work in SF make at least double what I do, and they almost all had extremely privileged upbringings. They went to top 10 business schools. They summer in Tahoe, that kind of thing. I was in the home office a few months ago for our annual kickoff meeting, and one of the speakers polled the room. Has anyone here worked at Amazon? Nobody raised their hand. Wow, I'm surprised. I said, does warehouse count? And the entire room erupted in laughter. For certainly, I just told a very enjoyable joke. Answer. I don't think I know anyone who is rich, but I have a PhD, and most of my colleagues grew up in a more privileged home than I did. I'm the first in my family to have a graduate degree. I worked my jerk off at a state school. My dad worked in a factory. My colleagues all assume he was an engineer. He was not. I am one of the few PhDs that I know who has worked a variety of low-wage jobs, including in grad school. It's a bizarre feeling to have so little in common with your coworkers. When you said your colleagues thought you were joking about working in a warehouse, I felt that in my soul. Story 110. By someone who made 12x my salary went on and on forever, showing me his scuba diving photos and talked about how I should pick up the hobby of scuba diving in the Maldives. At the time, I was getting food from the food bank, even though I was working full-time. He was the one who signed off payroll. He knew how little I made. Story 111. Before my parents realized that private schools are a huge joke, they sent me to one from kindergarten to 5th grade. Literally everyone I know goes skiing or snowboarding every winter or flies out for the summer. I asked my parents if we're ever going to go, and they were so flabbergasted about my expectations when I was a kid. Story 112. About 10 years ago, I was at one of the lowest points of my life. I had lost everything due to substances and adult beverages. Kids, wife, house, job, all gone. I went to visit a friend of mine who was rich. He is a multimillionaire, but he lives in California. While his dollar doesn't go as far as it might in more affordable places, he has a very comfortable life. His home is located in the foothills of a town where you must make 6 figures just to afford a refrigerator box. Anyway, I was hanging out with him on his deck, enjoying a fat spleef and the view. At some point, he says, dude, I just can't wait until I make it. I'm thinking like, bro, you know my situation. I have no home, no job. I'm on food stamps. And you decide to drop a comment so tone deaf, it shows how empathetic you actually are. I left his house and never contacted him again. Answer, I had a friend like this, not wealthy, but certainly the highest earning of our social circle by a comfortable margin. This was during the recession and Ed been laid off and had to move home with my parents at 30. I couldn't even get hired at the mall because I was overqualified. This friend was well aware of this, as I was not the only person in the group who was unemployed at the time. He listens for about 2 seconds and then goes, companies are bullshit. My job is talking about making us have an on-call schedule for the weekends. I used to fly to New York, we're in the Midwest, to shop at Barney's, and now I'm not going to be able to do that. I literally just turned around and walked the fudge out. Fast forward many years, and this person is now in a much different, low-paying occupation. And while I don't feel like, ha-ha, karma, I have to wonder if he thinks about that sometimes. Story 113. George W. Bush congratulating someone at a town hall for their work ethic, working 3 jobs, thinking they were doing this as a choice. He was pretty soundly criticized after that one. Story 114. Company event where people with investment properties told us that you just need to save hard to get that deposit. Just don't go out to dinner with your spouse as much, or just go to the pub every other Friday. Ah, yeah, so reducing restaurant dinners from 0 to 0 and the pub tab from 0 to 0. Still broke. My colleague left the Zoom midway through. If it was in person, he would have broken the door on the way out or came across the conference table at them. Answer, I just realized, and I don't know why I never put this together, that when they talk about going out to dinner, they don't mean the 30, 50 working class people spend. These types of people drop hundreds when they go out to eat. They think you're spending as much as they do to eat dinner. Of course, cutting back on 300 dinner dates would save a shootload of money, but normal people aren't spending that much going out, so their advice falls flat regardless. Story 115. Aunt was glowing about a table piece she'd gotten in Italy and had shipped back. She said it was a steal. I admit it was a nice piece. Clowns in and hanging on an old jalopy type car, about 30 inches long. She said it was 4K. In today's money, that's about 20K. She paid 20K for a center. Story 116. Back when I worked in a 7-Eleven, a girl broke a bottle and was about to clean it up. When her friend said in the most condescending way possible, "Don't, that's her job," and pointed at me, they ended up leaving the mess without apologizing or buying anything. While the designer clothes and their demeanor screamed rich, privileged 17-year-olds, I didn't know it was possible to be so out of touch with reality or empathy. Story 117. I was an assistant making just over $50K a year, and I heard someone on the board of directors say, "Of course he, mayor of a city, stole the money. You can't live on $90K a year." Story 118. Me and my ex were struggling financially when we first got married. I made enough to pay the bills, but there was nothing extra. She decided to enroll in school, and when she was filling out the FAFSA for financial aid, she asked me what my adjusted gross income was for the previous year. I have always done my own taxes, but at the time, but always threw the paperwork away when I was done, so I had no idea what it was. Our friend who was at our house at the time came from a very wealthy family who owned a hotel chain, had government contracts, etc. Without a second thought, he said, "Just call your accountant, they'll have it." He was baffled by the fact that having a personal accountant isn't something everyone has. Blew his mind. Story 119. When I was told I was too old for a roommate at 26 years old, I make decent money, but living is expensive these days. Half of those my age in my area are living with their parents out of necessity. Story 120. My granddad's church has a lunch hut where a bunch of volunteers cook a big meal once a week. And if you're homeless or just don't feel like cooking, then you can go eat there and leave a donation if you can. This old, rich, fat guy came up to my granddad one day and said that the whole idea of the lunch hut was stupid and homeless people should just learn how to cook. That guy clearly hasn't missed a meal. Story 121. Money is freedom, food, shelter, and health. Sometimes it keeps you out of legal trouble. Not enough money causes a lot or relationship stress. Story 122. During a dinner party, we started talking about our experiences in high school. I mentioned the diversity of my large 6A school and that almost half the student population was on free or reduced lunch. A woman who had grown up privileged in the San Francisco area absolutely burst out laughing and thought I was joking. She said, "Free or reduced lunch? Why? What? They couldn't afford food?" It got real quiet and real awkward when I explained, yes, that's exactly what happens in public school. She had only attended private school, kindergarten through grad school. Story 123. I used to teach at a very expensive private school. This school went all the way through from kindergarten to high school. I had to give some students who were about 9 years old a ride in my car one time. A spoiled set of twins, in particular, couldn't understand why my car was so old and poor looking. Adults are apparently supposed to have new expensive cars. My dad is an adult and he drives a Rolls Royce. He gets a new car every year. You should get a new car too. Why don't you buy a new car? When I tried to explain that I was still in my first year of teaching and had only finished uni last year, so didn't really have money yet, the response was, "But our dad has always had new cars, even when he was at university." On another occasion, one of them smashed her brand new iPhone on purpose to prove to other students her dad would buy her a new one. Answer: I'm a nanny and the kids at their school aren't crazy rich, but well off. One time I had to pick a friend of the oldest NK in my car. She kept asking why we needed the windows down, AIC doesn't work, why we couldn't listen to her favorite songs, only radio, and so on. It's a 2011 Hyundai Sonata, and it gets me to where I need to go, and I keep it clean, but I have never felt so embarrassed, especially from a child. Never again on my car. Story 124. Back in college, I met this kid. He told a story that his dad took him to buy a car for his birthday. He knew what he wanted, but couldn't decide between two colors. His dad bought him both. He was pissed that his dad told him he had to keep them clean. Story 125. I have one friend who I wouldn't say is rich, but she's upper middle class, yet doesn't seem to realize it. Some of her best moments include complaining that the student house she was moving into didn't have a wine rack. My grandma downsized from an 8-bedroom house to a 5-bedroom house. When I go to buy a house, my parents will just give me a $20K deposit. Note this was said in a way that was very nonchalant and as though that was just totally standard. There are likely more, but yeah, she lives on a totally different planet. Story 126. I've never experienced it personally, but I've heard several stories about rich people who flat out refuse to respond to anything said or asked by cashiers, repair people, drivers, etc., on the grounds that they don't talk to the help. Answer: I've had this happen. I set up musical instruments and sound systems for a living. One time I was up in a mansion in a gated community at the top of Beverly Hills, delivering a piano for someone's birthday party. They had the full life-size Throne of Swords from Game of Thrones in their living room. It very well might have been the actual throne from the show. I tried asking a question to the woman who let us in, who was silently watching us work, and she literally just stared at me and then turned around and walked away. Story 127. Rich friend, just take Friday off work and fly out to visit me this weekend. I know it's last minute, but I'm sure there's seats available. Me, I don't think I can make this weekend. Rich friend, oh yeah, I looked and saw it was only coach available. Don't be embarrassed. I don't blame you for not wanting to sit next to them. Me thinking, does this guy truly think that's why? Lol, I just earn average money. Answer: we try really hard to not rent a vehicle when we travel. I like the slow pace of public transportation and the lack of stress navigating. Anyway, we had made friends with the guy who owned the tour company we went on a pub crawl with and made plans to meet up after a hockey game. Told him we'd get there when we could because we didn't know how packed the train would be after the game. And he said, just take an Uber. You don't want to ride with those people. We are those people, you twat. Oh, and I'd like to add our train pulled away before the line of cars began to move out of the parking lot. Who won? Story 128. I heard someone say it's ridiculous that they don't have attendance at the petrol station anymore because it only cost a couple of shillings extra. Story 129. Anyone can get a job in this area. The CEO of the company that makes $500K a year, to me, a $40K a year employee. Story 130. My sister's ex was born into a rich family and was so out of touch it was unreal. He was the poster child for spoiled white bro. He was racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and downright rude. His parents found him a fancy job making very good money, so he immediately threw it in my face that I'm lazy and stupid for not finding better jobs. I have a disability and it's incredibly difficult to find work. He told me, if you don't like the job market in this country, leave. Easy for a rich, spoiled brat to say when mommy and daddy's money can pay for your cruises around the world while I'm struggling just to find my next meal. I'm glad my sister dumped his dumbass. Story 131. Me, how can you justify paying us an exact median wage when the cost of living in Denver is far from median? VP of Comcast, I was on food stamps once and now look at me, you just have to work hard. Me, I was told that about college too, $70K in debt making slightly above min wage. VP, I think you just have a bad attitude. The old pull yourself up by the bootstraps argument. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.